$600. That's all it takes to blast across the water feeling like James Bond. Not a model, not a video game, a real jet boat, capable of reaching nearly 50 kilometers per hour. The strange part? It wasn't built by a luxury boat company. It wasn't designed for a Hollywood movie. It came from China, and the story behind it turns out to be far bigger than a cheap little boat. Because this tiny machine might reveal how China is turning Hollywood-style fantasies into products that almost anyone can afford. The boat that shouldn't exist. At first glance, it looks almost ridiculous. Too small to be taken seriously, too cheap to be trusted, and definitely too simple to deliver the kind of excitement people usually associate with high-performance watercraft. The crate is opened. Parts are scattered across the ground. The hull is light enough for 2 people to carry. The engine looks surprisingly ordinary. Everything about it says budget. Nobody standing there really expects much. There's curiosity, mixed with just enough skepticism to make the first launch interesting. Then, the engine comes to life. The little boat slips into the water. A quick squeeze of the throttle, and suddenly the bow lifts. Water explodes behind it. Instead of crawling across the lake, it shoots forward with surprising speed. Within seconds, everyone on shore is laughing. Not because the boat looks funny, because it actually works. The first driver swings through a corner. Spray flies into the air. Another hard turn. Another burst of laughter. The expectation was simple. This would probably be another cheap gadget that looked better online than it did in real life. Instead, it delivered something nobody expected: excitement. And once one person climbed out, someone else immediately wanted a turn. Maybe that was the first clue. People weren't lining up because they needed a boat. They were lining up because they wanted to know what that smile felt like. And that question only becomes stranger once another group, hundreds of miles away, climbs into a nearly identical boat and reacts almost exactly the same way. Why every grown man starts smiling. The second group has never met the first. Different lake, different people, different day. Yet somehow, the reaction is almost identical. The moment the throttle opens, they stop acting like adults. They shout, they race each other, they drift around corners that don't need drifting. They invent competitions that didn't exist 5 minutes earlier. For a few moments, mortgages disappear. Emails disappear. Deadlines disappear. It's just water, speed, and laughter. Watch their faces closely. No one is talking about horsepower. Nobody asks about fuel economy. Nobody even cares how long the engine will last. They're completely focused on one thing: how much fun they're having. There's something strangely familiar about it. It feels less like buying a machine and more like rediscovering something that had quietly disappeared years ago. Maybe that's why so many grown men instantly understand this boat. Because underneath the responsibilities, the schedules and the bills, there's still a 12-year-old who never actually left. He simply grew older. His toys just became more expensive. Ironically, this one made them affordable again. But if a tiny Chinese boat can create the same emotional reaction over and over again, perhaps the real product isn't the boat at all. James Bond Fantasy for $600. Nobody buys this thing to go fishing. Nobody buys it because it's the most practical way to spend a weekend. the moment it begins carving across the water, something else happens. The camera suddenly feels different. The low driving position, the spray exploding beside the hull, the sharp turns, the narrow channels. Everything starts looking less like a small recreational boat and more like a chase scene from an action movie. For a few minutes, ordinary people stop feeling ordinary. The lake becomes a movie set. Every corner becomes an escape route. Every burst of acceleration feels bigger than it actually is. That's the magic Hollywood has been selling for decades. Not vehicles, not gadgets, not explosions. A feeling. The feeling that just for a little while, you could become someone else. A spy, an explorer, a hero. This little boat simply delivers that same fantasy in a completely different way. Instead of watching James Bond, you become him. At least until the fuel tank runs low. And that's where this story begins to get even more interesting. Because the real surprise isn't that someone built a James Bond boat, it's who built it. China isn't selling boats. For years, the words "made in China" usually meant one thing: cheap products, cheap labor, cheap copies. But something has quietly changed. Today, China isn't just manufacturing objects, it's manufacturing experiences. Scroll through almost any online marketplace and you'll find tiny tanks, mini excavators, pocket-sized off-road vehicles, compact campers, microboats. Machines that seem almost unnecessary until you imagine yourself driving one. That's the trick. These products aren't competing against luxury brands, they're competing against boredom. They're selling the chance to live out a fantasy that used to exist only in movies or childhood imagination. The little jet boat is simply one example of something much bigger. And once you notice the pattern, it's impossible to unsee. Because this isn't really about boats anymore. It's about why millions of adults are suddenly willing to spend money on experiences that make them feel like kids again. A dream you can actually buy. For most of human history, fantasy belonged to storytellers. If you wanted to feel like an explorer, you watched adventure movies. If you wanted to be a race car driver, you played a video game. If you wanted to be James Bond, you sat in a movie theater for 2 hours, then drove home in the same family sedan. But something has changed. Today, you don't have to imagine the experience. You can buy it. Not for millions of dollars, not even for tens of thousands. Sometimes for little more than the price of a new smartphone. That may explain why these tiny machines have become so irresistible. They're not replacing real yachts, they're replacing imagination. For a father, it's an excuse to spend Saturday on the lake with his kids. For a group of friends, it's a reason to laugh like they haven't laughed in years. For someone trapped behind a desk all week, it's 2 hours of forgetting deadlines even exist. Nobody climbs into one of these boats expecting their life to change. But almost everyone climbs out smiling. Because memories are rarely created by luxury. They're created by moments that feel completely alive. And perhaps that's the most valuable thing this little boat delivers. Not transportation, not status, a story worth remembering. Which raises an even bigger question. If people are no longer buying products, what exactly are they buying? The business of imagination. Look closely, and this boat isn't unusual at all. It's simply part of a much larger movement. Tiny campers, mini trucks, pocket-sized excavators, small off-road vehicles, electric go-karts, compact boats. On paper, many of them make very little sense. Most people don't actually need them. yet millions of people want them anyway. Why? Because modern consumers aren't chasing bigger machines anymore. They're chasing bigger experiences. For decades, companies competed by building something stronger, faster, bigger, more powerful. Now another competition has quietly begun. Who can create the biggest emotional reaction? Because emotions are surprisingly affordable. You don't need a 100-foot yacht to feel adventurous. You don't need a $1 million supercar to feel free. Sometimes, all it takes is a ridiculous little boat racing across a quiet lake. Technology made these products possible. Manufacturing made them affordable. But emotion? That's what people are really paying for. And perhaps that's why this strange little boat is far more important than it first appears. What everyone was really buying. By now, it's easy to think this story was about engineering, or Chinese manufacturing, or clever product design. But go back to the beginning. Nobody celebrated because the engine started. Nobody cheered because the specifications looked impressive. Nobody jumped out of the boat talking about horsepower. What they remembered was how they felt. The laughter, the surprise, the childish excitement that appeared almost instantly. Somehow, a machine smaller than most dining tables managed to erase adulthood for a little while. Maybe that's the real product. Not fiberglass, not an engine, not a steering wheel. A temporary escape. For an hour, you aren't thinking about work. You're not checking your phone. You're not worrying about bills. You're chasing imaginary villains across the water with a smile that probably hasn't appeared in years. Hollywood has spent generations selling people incredible adventures. This little boat simply lets ordinary people step inside one. Perhaps that's why it spread so quickly online. Not because people wanted to own the boat, because they wanted to own that feeling. More than a $600 boat. In the end, nothing about the boat has changed. It's still small, still simple, still built in China, still costs around $600. But after watching people climb in, race across the water, and climb back out grinning from ear to ear, it's difficult to see it the same way. What looked like a cheap recreational toy turns out to be something much more valuable. Proof that extraordinary experiences don't always require extraordinary wealth. Sometimes they begin with a crazy idea, a quiet lake, and a machine nobody expected to take seriously. Perhaps that's the biggest lesson hidden inside this tiny boat. China didn't just figure out how to manufacture another inexpensive product. It figured out how to manufacture fantasy. $600. At the beginning of this story, that sounded like the price of a cheap toy. By the end, it feels more like the price of becoming the hero of your own movie. Maybe that's why people around the world keep buying products like this. Not because they're perfect, not because they're practical. But because for a brief moment, they let ordinary people feel extraordinary. And perhaps that's the future of manufacturing. The world's biggest factories may no longer be competing to build the best products. They may be competing to build the most unforgettable experiences.